Um, I'd like to now introduce Michael O'Loughlin, who is a professor in the College of Education and Health Services and Derner School of Psychology. He is also on the faculty of the postgraduate programs. Since 2018, he has been co-editor of the Journal of Psychoanalysis, Culture, and Society. He is editor of two book series, one in psychoanalysis and one in child and youth studies. He writes about trauma, psychosis, migration, childhood subjectivity, schooling, psychoanalysis, race, and politics, and he directs the Adelphi Asylum Project. He's in private practice on Long Island, New York.
Thank you very much, Ron. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Looking at these two screens, it's almost like my life is flashing before my eyes. I know so many people in so many different contexts, and it's always a special privilege to speak in front of people that you know rather than in front of strangers. So I'm really delighted to be here. I just want to make two comments to begin with. This chapter was originally written in 2006, and I have written a few more recent papers that update this work with children that I'd be glad to share with anyone who's interested. And the chapter was written for an audience originally of early childhood professionals and professors, so the work is translational. The intent of the chapter is to communicate a psychoanalytic framework to educators. The chapter does, however, embody some of the core principles that inform my work with children. Some of you might be put off by Lacanian theory. Lacan's reputation for theoretical obtuseness is well deserved. However, I can assure you that the Lacanian child therapy literature is richly textured, clinically compelling, and highly readable. I have learned much from the works of Laurent Denon-Bredot, Françoise Dolto, Maud Menoni, Catherine Mathelin, and Annie Rogers, as well as the authors of a recent compilation of Lacanian child therapy edited by Carol Owens and Stephanie Farley-Quinn. These analysts offer a disposition towards child work that I find very appealing. There are elements of this position to be found, of course, in Winnicott and in the Klein-Tavistock approach, to be sure, but the organicity of the notion of the child as your teacher is really privileged in the way I read Lacanian child work, and this is a very comfortable fit for me. My work with and my writing about children, and indeed about psychoanalysis in general, is characterized by a few commitments. And the first one is autobiographical introspection about the formation of my own unconscious. The second is a recognition of the socio-historical basis of subjectivity, including ancestral, genealogical, and intergenerational inheritances and legacies, and the silences and demetaphorization that can point to where interior work needs to be done. I doubt if anybody here today will present a sentence with as many multisyllabic words as that one had. A resistance to any adjustment therapy, any impulse, for example, to fix or cure a patient, and a striving towards the emancipatory potential of a psychoanalysis built on analytic reverie and receptivity and patient-free association, whether expressed verbally or performatively in drawings and in play, is central to my work. In addition, the power of understanding the constrictive force of demand, obligation, dutifulness, and a demand for love in a child's subject formation, and the releasing potential of exploring the possibility of desire. Bound by dutifulness as I grew up, I kept late to such lessons, which is why I'm sure I feel so passionately about these ideas now. Here are a few of the key thoughts from my chapter. My interest in the chapter is to explore the pedagogical and psychotherapeutic implications of working with what Christopher Bolas refers to as the unthought known in the lives and desires of children, a latent subjectivity embodied in unconscious desires and ancestral memory. Psychoanalysis helps us to name the unnameable, speak the unspeakable, and know the unknowable. In her book, Jacques Lacan and the Adventure of Insight, Shoshana Fellman puts it this way, quote, "The analyst must be taught by the analysand's unconscious. It is by structurally making himself a student of the patient's knowledge that the analyst becomes the patient's teacher, makes the patient learn what would otherwise remain forever inaccessible to him." My own subjectivity has been constructed through the absences, losses, anxieties, and dread that surrounded my tenuous grasp on life, as well as by my prolonged exposure to hospital care, here in quotes, as a baby. I was fragile, I was different, I was alone. Yet I also experienced myself as desired, and this was enough to inspire in me a struggle to live. My childhood is not a historical remnant, it is very much who I am today. I live my childhood anew each day. As Jacqueline Rose noted in the context of a discussion of children's fiction, quote, the most crucial aspect of psychoanalysis in discussing children's fiction is its insistence that childhood is something in which we continue to be implicated and which is never simply left behind. Childhood persists. In The Broken Piano, Catherine Matherland documents how children's desires are inextricably constructed in the matrix of parental desire. Thus, paradoxically, to have a child in therapy is to clearly have their parents in therapy too. In History Beyond Trauma, Devoine and Gauthier take the argument further, suggesting that humans also embody unconscious memories of the unresolved trauma of their ancestors. The consulting room is crowded with ghosts, and the separation of life into childhood and adulthood is troubled by these shadows of past into present and present into past. Abraham and Torok suggest that a psychoanalytic treatment is, quote, a psychoanalysis in absentia of several generations. In Separation and Creativity, Maud Menoni suggests that one purpose of psychoanalytically informed therapy with a child is to engage a child in understanding the process by which that child's desires have become spoken for him or her through parental or institutional demand. Quote, what can the child discover in the analytic dialogue about what it means within his or her own psychic reality to be in the eyes of others the bearer of a symptom, quote, illness, in quotes, or deficiency, in quotes, and to be treated with mood-altering drug? The power of psychoanalysis lies in its specificity and even its limits. Its task is to expand the area of experience that can be articulated in the individual's own terms and own name, and therefore must leave open case by case how that project will mesh or not with the medical and educational goals of normalizing children's behavior. Regarding a child's speech, Menoni also noted, quote, we must also realize who is speaking, because the subject of the words is not necessarily the child. She articulates the core of child work, the move from the speech of the other, parole vide, to speech for the self, parole plein. And this is a lengthy quote from one of her books. The reality of the illness in quotes, is never underestimated in psychoanalysis, but an attempt is made to pinpoint how the real situation is lived by the child and his family. It is then that the symbolic value that the subject attaches to the situation, re-echoing a given family history, takes on meaning. For the child, it is the words spoken by those around him about his, quote, illness that assume importance. Whatever the child's real state of deficiency or disturbance may be, the analyst endeavors to understand the words that remain petrified in an anxiety or encased in a physical disorder. In treatment, the subject's questions will replace the demand or anxiety of parents and child, a question that is his deepest wish, concealed hitherto in a symptom or in a particular type of relationship with his surroundings. What will become clear is the manner in which the child bears the imprint, not only of the way his birth was awaited, but also of what he is going to represent for each parent as a function of their respective past histories. His real existence will come into conflict with the unconscious projections of his parents, and this is where the misunderstandings arise. If the child gets the impression that every access is barred to a true word, he can in some cases search for possibility of expressing himself in illness. Lacking the ability to name the unnameable, the child is encased within the shell of an imposed parental identity and remains trapped in an alienated and painful existence. As a result, Menoni suggests the child lacks a capacity for creativity and fantasy. Intergenerational trauma compounds the problem. If a child continues to lack the capacity to metabolize traumatic losses into adulthood, there's a high probability that a similar silence about emotional loss would be bequeathed to ensuing generations. To elicit desire, the analyst must take care not to offer too much understanding or clarification, even though the patient may demand it. Feeding demand only leads to the negation of the kind of desire that leads to creativity and the growth of fantasy. As Bruce Fink noted, quote, the more you try to understand, the less you hear, the less you can hear something new and different. In my chapter, I offer some clinical examples and end with a comment on a teacher who worked beautifully with one of my young patients. And here's what I said about the teacher. The love this teacher offers is inspiring, as is her capacity to see beauty and possibility in this truly vulnerable little girl. In my estimation, it is our ethical responsibility as educators to offer our students spaces in which to name and realize the unthought knowns that are the pathways to their desires. The corollary of this, of course, is that we have to be prepared to stoutly resist initiatives that are designed to erase children's desires and limit their imaginations. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.